Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the summer series presented by the Montana Renewable Energy Association. My name is Andrew Linus, and I'm the Executive Director of MREA. Before we begin, I want to recognize our sponsors, Clearwater Credit Union, Kaufman Engineers, the Montana Energy Office at DEQ, Onsite Energy, the Alternative Energy Resources Organization, and Ford Montana Foundation. I also just want to give a brief description of MREA, the organization I work for. We're a nonprofit, membership-based organization that works on renewable energy education and advocacy across the state. And one of the many things we do is host educational events and presentations. And this is actually the 11th of our summer series presentations. It's been a great summer putting these on. We've had a lot of fun doing it and have been excited to be joined by a lot of really knowledgeable and just incredible speakers, and today's is no different. I'm very excited to be passing the mic over to Bethany Speer, who works with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory down in Colorado. And Bethany is going to walk us through kind of what's next for renewable energy and insights into NREL and their work and what they do. So without further ado, I'm going to stop my screen share, pass it over to Bethany. And Bethany, you can go ahead and take it away.
Great. Can you hear me okay, Andrew?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
And can you see my screen?
Yes, you're looking good.
Okay, great. So I guess just to introduce myself, Bethany Speer. I sit in Denver, Colorado at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I've been there about 12 years. My background is mostly in policy and economics, and I'm somewhat of a generalist. So I'm going to touch on several topics very quickly in this presentation, but I'm not a specialist. So, I definitely welcome questions, and I'm also very much glad to connect you after the presentation to relevant experts if you have deeper questions on any particular issue. I also probably have too many slides, so I'm going to try to go through them somewhat quickly, but hopefully you can access the slides later and look into some of the resources that I reference if those are of more interest. So just kind of laying out the presentation, I'll briefly introduce NREL, highlight a couple of projects that I thought are of particular relevance to Montana. Go through a couple of innovation areas that NREL is working on, and then kind of changing topics a bit, get into some global trends and some kind of forward-looking issue areas. And then hopefully we can have some time for open discussion. So a little bit about NREL. We have around 2,500 employees, and we've got a really cool campus in Golden, Colorado, in case you can visit us. Where we, really kind of act as a living laboratory. NREL always works through partnerships. So we work with primarily the Department of Energy, which provides the bulk of our funding, but we also work with other U.S. government agencies, foreign governments, and then many different universities, local governments, NGOs, technical institutions, and a lot with industry. So helping industry really develop technologies and take those to market. We work really across the spectrum of clean energy technologies, so not just renewable energy, but energy efficiency, transport, systems integration. We also do stuff around circular economy, basic research, so really a variety of different technologies. We're really seeking to support discovery, basic research, applied research, and then also work with partners to get those technologies out to market. So quickly, some examples of work that we've done in Montana or with local stakeholders, or also some emerging areas that I thought might be of interest to you. So we've in the past done some work with the National Park Service, working with them on issues in different parks, but one that I thought I'd highlight was working with the Greater Yellowstone area to do a GHG or greenhouse gas inventory, and then identify some opportunities for reducing emissions within that area, and working in particular with the Park Service regarding their facilities and operations. We also did work with the Western Governors Association to identify areas throughout the region that could offer the lowest cost wind and renewable energy, wind and solar resources, so they could determine opportunities for developing more transmission to access those areas. And kind of a related effort, this is a free online tool that you can access called the Wind Prospector. And this highlights the areas that we found in Montana and elsewhere that we thought represented the best opportunities. And this is really done through, again, like a very robust stakeholder engagement process and very much a data-driven analytical effort. But I think a couple of these hubs that we identified in Montana are currently being developed. And then there's one, I think that it is currently undeveloped, and I forgot the name of that. But I believe it's the one where you see there aren't red dots around it. But you can explore that tool more online. Another area that's kind of emerging work is developing an online platform for streamlining permitting for residential PV. So just recognizing how quickly that market is growing and the burden on local governments or whatever authorities have the jurisdiction to review applications for residential PV and make sure they adhere to codes and keep the homeowners home safe, but are also safe for the grid. So helping them kind of reduce that burden and develop a more modern system for streamlining those approvals. So we worked with a number of different local governments, code authorities and others to develop and vet this platform, and we're just getting ready to launch it. And here we have a few different local governments that are willing to act as pilots for this. But I believe we're still open to working with more governments. So if you're part of one of those local entities or working with them, perhaps you could raise awareness of this opportunity. This is a tool that would be free to those governments to utilize. And Andrew, can you still hear me? I just got a message that my internet is unstable.
Yes, we can. You went a little transformer for a minute there, but I think you're back and we're good to go. Okay, cool. So getting into some kind of more technology innovations. One area that's emerging for NREL is this partnership with ExxonMobil. So they agreed to provide $100 million of funding to NREL and another lab over 10 years to really do some advanced research and modeling around especially biofuels and biomass. So we're working with them right now on some kind of heavy-duty modeling and computational analysis around algae and how to kind of take pilot or smaller sort of algae tanks and take those outdoors where they can be scaled and kind of understand how additional factors, when you move something outdoors, sunlight and weather could affect the ability to scale algae to really provide large amounts of biofuel that could be used, for example, in like heavy-duty diesel trucks. Another area for innovative work is under our partnership with Wells Fargo, which is funding this innovation incubator. So under that effort, Wells Fargo provides $250,000 grants to the selected startup companies to enable them to access NREL's facilities and our experts to work with them to further develop their technologies to get those out to the market. So, or to attract a next round of investors. And so those efforts are usually designed around different themes. Different cohorts of companies are brought in and various rounds of funding are provided.
to different groups. So, you know, I know in the past we've done a lot around commercial buildings, and I think now there's some work around kind of clean agriculture. So just a couple examples of how we're working with industry and kind of more innovations. And then the next couple of examples are centered more around taking mature technologies, but adding or enhancing how those are being deployed to sort of improve utilization of those technologies. So one example is with solar and developing approaches solar, and then also agrivoltaics. So low impact solar is where you preserve the topsoil where the solar panels are installed, and then after the panels are installed, native or other beneficial vegetation can be planted. So this provides a lot of benefits. It helps reduce runoff. It's lower cost to developers. It can produce productivity of nearby fields. And then there's also agrivoltaics where you have panels, like a solar plant combined with a farm. So in that case, the panels can provide some shading to the plants, which can reduce water usage to water those plants. And then also the vegetation around the panels can actually provide like a cooling effect, which enhances the energy production from the solar panels. So a lot of interesting kind of mutual benefits, and some of those benefits are kind of very site specific and dependent on what types of plants you're growing, but this map here just shows where we have some different on the ground research efforts being done with universities and other partners to kind of look at the benefits of these approaches. So another one kind of around how can we further enhance already mature technologies. So I'm sure you're aware wind turbines provide or create some risk and some fatalities, not insignificant fatalities for birds and bats. So we really want to see how we can design and operate wind farms to be to have less impact on those populations. So there is existing technology. So one existing technology is like an ultrasonic frequency that can deter bats. However, some of those tools only work for certain species. So we want to figure out how we can improve those technologies so they work for more species. And then there's other technologies we're also working to develop with other industry partners, like around kind of smarter curtailment. So you can actually, turn off the wind turbines when you know there's, populations of birds coming through or bats. But that is sort of a clunky technology. So how can we improve that, both to make sure that, the birds or bats are less impacted, but also kind of reduce operations and maintenance costs on the turbines and ensure greater productivity of the wind turbines. So now kind of changing themes, but going to some global trends, and there's a lot that we could cover here. So I'm really just kind of going to briefly touch on a couple key things, but I thought this was kind of a cool chart from the IEA showing how wind and solar and EVs have really grown over the past couple decades. So wind and solar combined, we now have over 1,200 gigawatts of capacity installed globally. And it's about more than double that, 2,500 if you take into account hydro and other renewable energy resources. So that's really significant. And then around 7 million EVs deployed to date. But of course, this isn't just about capacity installed. You have to take into account, what does that mean in terms of generation and system size and how those power sources are being integrated. So I thought this was another interesting graphic that maps a number of the key markets for renewable energy and sort of what level of average annual electricity generation is coming from wind and solar. So they actually broke out Texas and California as distinct markets, and you can kind of see them, how these compare with other international markets. So Texas is around 10% as an average annually, and then probably based on 2019 or 2018 data. And then California, is around 12%. But you can see there's a number of markets that are integrating much higher levels. So South Australia has over 40%. They've got really strong solar resources, of course, and then Denmark has a lot of wind. They actually have over an average of over 60%. But of course, these averages vary year by year, or if you average over the month or you look at a particular day, those percentage levels will change. So we can see, renewable energy deployment is growing significantly, and kind of just thinking about the power sector, especially, what are some of those key drivers. So I've just highlighted a few here. I'm sure there's others, and maybe we can talk about those in a discussion. But so one key driver, of course, is policy. Targets and mandates are key policies, so like renewable portfolio standards. Feed-in tariffs have been really popular internationally. Now really there's more of a trend moving towards competitive procurement. So reverse auctions where governments and utilities specify a certain amount of renewable energy capacity that they're desiring, and then qualified developers basically bid and compete against each other to offer the lowest price through a long-term contract. This is a cool chart, I thought, from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They've got a really nice database of auction data. So these are renewable energy auctions from around the world, with solar in like the yellow dot, and then wind in blue. And I believe the bigger dots are around 1 to 2 to 3 gigawatts of procurement. So quite a bit of procurement happening under these reverse auctions. And you can see, it's not a perfectly pretty chart, but you can see how generally, prices are coming down, and wind and solar are actually kind of, generally competing against each other globally in terms of price range. And, you're seeing a lot of auctions come through between, maybe 12 or 1.2 cents to 8 cents a kilowatt hour. So really interesting. And, these auctions are happening not just in developed countries, but a number of them have been implemented in developing countries, and notably India has done some really interesting experiments with auctions recently. So another factor is cost, and these are not the best charts because they're sort of difficult to take in quickly, but just to show that certain component costs have really come down over the past decade or several decades. So showing some learning for PV modules and similar for wind turbines. Another key driver is customer choice. So you may have heard of the RE100 platform, where over 240 major corporations decided to procure 100% renewable energy for their operations, and they want to be able to do this not just in the US or wherever they're headquartered, but really internationally wherever they have operations. And a number of corporates are also looking to work with their supply chains to be able to buy renewable energy to meet sustainability targets that they've set for themselves. So here you can see some of the bigger procurements that have happened this year. So, Amazon, a gigawatt procurement, Microsoft, 650 megawatts, and a number of others. You can see globally too, like the market is quite large. So 2019, there's around 20 gigawatts of corporate procurement through power purchase agreements. But of course, there's many other ways that corporates can buy or invest in renewable energy. So the actual market is probably quite a bit larger. And then the 2020 number is, of course, year to date. But yeah, some corporates are also starting to think not just about renewable energy, but other benefits that they might try to achieve through these procurements. And Microsoft did one earlier this year where they're looking to incorporate environmental justice and social inclusion elements within their procurement, kind of target certain communities for reinvestment. Another key driver is investor preferences. So there was a study that was highlighted in Forbes earlier this year that came out of the International Energy Agency and Imperial Business College, which is a leading business college based out of the UK. And they compared some portfolios and investments in fossil fuel compared to what they called green energy, and found significantly higher returns for green energy compared to those other portfolios of fossil fuel investments. So there's a lot of nuances in this study that I think warrant diving into to really understand their analysis. But I thought it was interesting to see this highlighted in Forbes. And then you've probably heard about the BlackRock announcement, where they're going to be trying to work with more of their clients to steer them towards more sustainable equity products and steer them away from coal. But there's obviously a lot of caveats in terms of what that actually means for their operations. So then kind of getting into more forward-looking topics. So obviously, a major item for discussion is kind of what are the implications of COVID-19 pandemic and economic downturn on clean energy and sustainability more generally. So, I have just a lot of question marks here. I think there's more questions than there are answers at this point, but obviously saw some initial downturns in energy demand when economies were experiencing shutdowns, and then sort of different levels of reductions in demand, or sometimes demand shifting perhaps from commercial sector to residential sector. There's implications, of course, for government budgets, which I think both national and subnational governments will see smaller budgets. So how will they use those? Will they prioritize other efforts beyond sustainability or clean energy investments? But at the same time, especially internationally, a number of countries are looking at including clean energy elements within their economic recovery stimulus packages. There could be impacts on kind of access to capital, and then supply chain concerns. So how might developers or investors kind of manage supply chain risks for project going forward, and how might they shorten their supply chains? And then utilization of public transport. So of course, a lot of people may not feel comfortable using public transport, so they may be using other approaches. So will that be cars, or are there other ways to enable people to kind of travel safely but also cleanly? So could there be greater access to walkways or scooters or other or biking or other forms of transport? I think Bloomberg New Energy Finance is definitely expecting further cost reductions in certain technologies. So these are just a couple examples, but this shows utility scale PV systems and expected drops from 2020 through 2050. So these are the numbers that they're using in their modeling. And they're looking at cost reductions, not just in the modules, but other parts of the installations, inverters, balance of plant, engineering and other services that would be required to install these projects. And then similarly, they're looking at somewhat significant price drops in lithium ion as well over the same time, but not as drastically as we've seen over the past 10 years. And then, so as I mentioned, some governments are considering, sort of green elements within recovery packages. So internationally, there's been about $122 billion within national and subnational, oops, I skipped a slide, recovery efforts that have been kind of labeled as sustainable. And then, they've targeted different sectors, so a lot, going towards electrified transport, carbon and climate, energy efficiency, hydrogen, and other elements. And you can see here too some of the governments that are kind of focusing on green economic recovery. So South Korea and Germany being a couple of key ones. And I probably won't go into detail here, but these are just some different elements that at least Bloomberg New Energy Finance is proposing. A lot of different NGOs, think tanks, technical groups are coming out with their recommendations about their promotion of certain elements that should be included within green stimulus packages. So it'll be interesting to see how these develop, if there's any measures developed nationally or subnationally in the US and then internationally, and how that could impact kind of relative competitiveness in clean energy markets. So with that, I will conclude my presentation, and I'm glad to hand it back over to you, Andrew.
Great. Well, thank you, Bethany, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. I can see a couple of questions already rolling in, so I'll just remind folks that if you have any questions, please go ahead and use the chat function to submit those. I just wanted to mention really quick, I love hearing about the solar app work, because I think, MREA's work in Montana, we talk so much about rooftop solar and the cost of solar coming down, and I think a lot of people don't realize that that includes working on not just the panels and the technology, but also all of those other costs, like you just mentioned, things like inverters and engineering and permitting, and just the process and the time that it takes. So I think it really speaks to the kind of holistic approach NREL takes to addressing technologies and helping make them more affordable, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was just gonna dive into our audience questions here. So let's see, the first one, you just mentioned there are, about 250 corporations committed to going to 100% renewable energy. Is there a specific timeline that a lot of these companies are targeting, or does it kind of jump all over the map? Is it, 2030, 2050? Is there any insights there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the way that RE100 frames this, and they've got a really great website, I think it's re100.org, but I think the commitment is 100% renewable energy by 2050 or sooner. So there are a number of corporates that are coming out with 2030, 2040 targets, and then Bloomberg New Energy Finance, I think, is actually tracking these a bit in a bit greater detail, but I have to admit, I haven't looked to see, are most of the targets 2050 or sooner, but I think generally what I've heard, or at least the ones making the headlines, are more ambitious.
And that's great. I think a lot of people feel that the sooner the better, as practically soon as possible would be best. So let's see, the next question here, a question about the Microsoft and some of their work. Do you have any insights into what type of action and practices Microsoft is taking on towards environmental justice and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have to admit, this is another area where I could look deeper. I know they're working with SOL systems. It's like SOL systems. And I think they've done some other work previously kind of around these themes. But I think they're targeting certain communities that they felt like maybe had received underinvestment in clean energy. And I think there's a certain portion of the deal, and I'm not really sure how this is structured, but they're actually reinvesting back into communities. And I have to admit, I'm not clear on the details. And I'm not sure actually that they released the details yet, but it sounded like there's about $50 million of reinvestment that they're looking towards offering in certain communities. So it may be that the projects would be distributed into, let's say, lower income areas or others where they felt like there were specific environmental justice concerns.
Great. Sort of maybe a related question to kind of green energy investments. Is NREL tracking, or have you seen any trends in how companies are investing in green energy, and whether or not they kind of shy away from states or focus on states where, the investor-owned utilities or the public service commission is, has shown preference towards kind of continuing focusing on fossil fuel versus developing renewable energy? Do these companies kind of, do they take the path of least resistance, or they tend to try and set trends, I guess is kind of the question.
Yeah, I think some of both. There's definitely certain ways to procure renewables, or at least the renewable energy certificates, really, where they can use those certificates to make claims of using renewable energy, and to do that without being in the same market. So buying RECs or utilizing virtual PPAs. And then there's other companies that have decided to really try to open up a market. So in those cases, working with those incumbent utilities to oftentimes unlock kind of green tariff approaches. So that really requires a company that's willing to put in a lot of capacity, a lot of legal staff probably, to kind of be those early movers to get that green tariff framework in place that then other corporates can utilize. So I think the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance has been really leading a lot of that work in the U.S. and also World Resources Institute. But yeah, if you look for, it's REBA for short, REBA. They've got a lot of great info on green tariffs and how they've been able to work with corporates and utilities to find some joint solutions there.
Sure, and for the audience members, Montana's working through some kind of green tariff, green pricing discussions right now at kind of on a couple different levels. So I think those conversations will become more pertinent to Montana in the coming months and years as well. Next question we have here, are there any energy storage developments that are looking promising in the coming years, excuse me?
That's a great question. Storage is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but I should obviously be paying more attention to it. I know there's been already some really significant investments in storage internationally and nationally. And I know it's definitely sort of on the horizon. So yeah, I can't answer that question super well, but I'm definitely glad to follow up with the person who asked that and provide some recent analysis on the storage market.
Great. Yeah. So to the person who submitted that question, go ahead and shoot us an email, and we'll follow up with you. The next one's also about storage. So here we go. But it kind of goes back to, I think, the graph you showed, and I think from what I've seen, one of the big discussions about renewable energy right now is the question of intermittence, and then the phrase firming power, right? So how to ensure that if the sun isn't shining, if the wind isn't blowing, that there's still power available. And the question notes that Denmark is one of the leading countries in implementing variable energy resources, and there's a question about if you know more about how they have firmed up their grid. Is it large interconnected storage? Is it fossil fuel based? Or really other countries around the world too? How are folks really trying to address that problem in a sustainable way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's a variety of different techniques that can be used, and different approaches that are needed, kind of depending on what level of integration you're looking at. So obviously, you don't need the same tools for 5% integration as you might for 15 or 20% or even higher. So I think there's different ways to kind of lower hanging fruit ways. Improving forecasting for wind and solar can enable you to better plan for those, and there's also ways to think about to kind of better utilize existing grid resources to provide flexibility. And then there's, kind of heavier investments that might be needed. So yeah, investing in batteries or whatever is needed. But we've also got some really great toolkits that kind of lay out, the different sources of flexibility that you can access in the grid, and kind of which ones are sort of lower hanging fruit and lower costs, and then which ones are kind of like more advanced that you need to look into if you're, the Denmarks of the world.
Sure. Well, that's all of our audience questions. I have one last one for you. The theme of today is kind of what's next for renewable energy. So maybe on a personal note, just having worked at NREL for a while and seeing all the work that you all do and being in tune with the energy world, what's one of your top things in general that you're looking forward to, that you're excited about, whether it's a technology or a policy trend or something like that? What's kind of at the top of your list for what's coming up for renewable energy?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot, but I guess one issue that we've been thinking about more at NREL and that I think is really important is kind of circular economy considerations. And it's great to see how much these markets are growing, but how can we improve how if it's wind or solar or whatever technology it is, how those are produced, and using less energy and less waste to produce those. How can we also improve the sort of economic life of those investments, and then how can we better recycle those or reuse components? So obviously, we've got a lot of wind turbines and solar panels out there, and how do we make sure that those don't end up in the landfill, or how can we better recycle elements of those? So I think that's a really important question that we need to be looking at more closely, so that we can make sure that renewable energy is not just contributing lower carbon power, but also contributing more broadly to the sustainability of our economies.
Excellent. Well, I think that's definitely something to be excited about. So I would agree with you there. Well, we're a little over time, and so thank you, Bethany, for staying on and taking us through some Q&A here. And thank you just for joining us today and sharing your knowledge and your expertise.
Yeah.
We're really grateful, and so I appreciate all of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you to everyone who joined us. We already went through our Q&A. Thank you again to Bethany for presenting today. And as I mentioned, this is the last of the summer series presentations. And for those of you who are still on the call, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. I know a lot of you attended all 11 presentations. And in fact, if you did, maybe shoot me an email and I'll send you a sticker or something special as a thank you. Because it was feels like only a couple weeks ago that we started, but it's been a good 2.5 months with some really great presentations. For those of you who missed a number of our presentations, I am still working on processing all of the recordings, and those will go up on our YouTube channel so that you can take a look at those. Of course, if you want to access some of the slide decks, please shoot us an email and we'll make sure that we get you a copy of those. And of course, stay tuned to MREA and more information coming out from us. We're going to be doing a lot of website updates this fall, I think, to make sure our informational resources are up to date. And of course, we're going to be preparing for the upcoming legislative session, which will be big for us this year in whatever form it takes. So thank you all again. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you, Bethany. And we look forward to connecting with you all again in the future.